All right. Good morning, everyone. So today, for those of you who are at home, what we're going to talk about is just some basics of what is a method. I'm putting that in air quotes, but obviously you can't see me. But what is a method in Java? I used that word a couple of times on the first day of class. It's all of the stuff that you're writing on CodingBat, but I think it's important to actually talk about what they are. That way, we kind of have a better understanding about why CodingBat uses the word return versus having you print something or similar to that. So I'm going to skip over that for a second, but in general, what is a method? It's a section of code, right? So it's a small, organized piece of code that's only executed when you call upon it from somewhere else. So meaning, right, it will exist in your program. However, it won't do anything unless you specifically ask the program to do something with it. So think of this like all of the programs that are in your calculator. So let's say you have a quadratic formula in your calculator. That code exists in your calculator, but nothing happens unless you actually go through the menus and select it to tell it to run it. So very similar idea in Java. Now it says methods can be called from the main method. Now what that means is if you noticed on all of your summer work, everything lives in what is called the main method. When you press run on Replit, what it does is it runs through all of the lines in your main method. So if you want to call another method, you put the method signature, which we'll talk about in a second, but you put that line within your main method, and then it will execute. Now, this third bullet point, sometimes you need to send info to a method called a parameter. So again, the example I'm going to use quite a bit is the quadratic formula, just because I know that most of you have it in your calculator. But if you think about when you execute that program on your calculator, the first thing it asks you for is what is A, what is B, what is C, right? So for us, that would be the parameters, right? In Java, right, we can put parameters into our method signature, and then it will tell it, hey, you're going to get 3 integers as an input, quote unquote, or as parameters here. And then the last part, a method can return something, hence the keyword, right? So the basic idea of a method is that you're going to group together a section of code that does something really specific, right? So let's say I would write a method to calculate the volume of something. I would write a method that's going to go through and determine whether or not a number is even or odd. I could write a method that checks, how many vowels are in a word, right? So it's a small section of code that does something really specific, and they exist a lot for organization purposes, right? They're only going to run unless when you specifically tell them to. It helps to organize and keep your main method from being super cluttered. If there's something that you want to do specifically, you write it in an organized fashion. Your main method just has one line just to call that. But that is the basic idea, is that it's just a small section of code that does something very, very particular, right? So an example here, right? The main method is what we have at the top of the screen here, the public static void main. So when you press run, those 2 lines, those print statements and the method 1 call, notice, right? That second line of code in your main method is referencing this method 1 that exists, down here, right? So it's going to print out program starts here. Then with the method 1 call, what it's going to do is it's going to look down here and run whatever segment of code exists in method 1. So in this case, the way this output would look, it would say program starts here, printing in method 1, program ends here. So it'll read top down, and when it sees that method call, because it's referenced specifically by its name, it's going to jump straight down and run whatever exists in that part of the method, right? And here's a very other important concept here is these modifiers, right? So if you see private in front, the method can only be accessed within the class where it's written. Now that will make more sense once we get into writing classes. Public means you don't necessarily need to be within that class in order to use it. A good example of a public method is substring. Right? Substring is something that was on your summer work. That method exists in the string class, but every time you called it, you were in a different class. Right? So substring is a public method from the string class. Static is not something I want you guys to worry about right now. It'll make more sense later on once we've written some more classes and we understand a little bit more about what is an object and all of the stuff like that. So, what I wanted to go through here was I wanted to have or show you a little bit of a quick example about what is a method, right? And what is a method signature? So here, this is just a quick app I have on my iPad, right? So let's say, right, I'm gonna write the quadratic formula. So public, because I want this to be accessible from a program outside of this class, right? Static, in our case, everything will be static for right now. Just remember that. We'll talk about static a little bit more later on. Now, this next part that's going to exist right here is your return type. So, when I think about quadratic formula, whoops, you're going to see all my emojis, I guess, right? When I think about quadratic formula, that return type would be a double. And now the next part of this is just the name. So I'm going to call it quad form. Now, what goes in the parentheses here are your parameters. So I'm going to say int A, int B, int C. This first line here is called your method signature. So understand here, excuse me, right? This whole thing, public static double quad form, is called your method signature, right? Public tells me the access. The static we don't worry about. The double, this is the return type, right? And then we have the actual name of whatever it is. Quad form is now the method name. And so now within this, I'm going to write the quadratic formula, right? So the first thing I'm going to figure out is the discriminant, right? So I'm going to say int, we'll call it discriminant, there we go, equals b times b minus 4 times a times c, right? Cool, I found b squared minus 4ac. And so I'm just going to return the one root here because one root is fine for our particular case. So now I'm going to say return -1 times b plus, I don't know why I have these extra parentheses, math dot square root discriminant, put some parentheses around this to make sure I get my math correct because that's important. Oops, come on. There we go. Divided by 2 times a. Make sure I put that in parentheses. Now notice that return statement means if I go up here to my main method and I call quad form on 1 comma -3 comma 5, right? I can set this equal to a double. So I can say double C, or double root, let's call it, equals quad form of -1, 3, 5. So now this has a return type of a double. This is equal to a double. So when this root gets returned, the idea is root is now going to be equal to whatever that is. Quad form of -1 comma or 1 comma -3 comma 5 is a double. It returns that value. As opposed to just printing it, now that value is stored in memory in your computer. So I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, obviously we will have a chance to talk about it on Friday. Right? And so now I can print this, and I can press run, and it's not a number because I guess that doesn't have a root. That's what NaN means. It means not a number. So if I go here, let's force this thing to have a root by just making this -2. If I run this again, there we go. I get the positive root, and it prints it. Now, another thing that's important, right? If I did not have this here, this will still run. It just produces no output because I didn't print anything. So it's important that your return type can be anything. It can be an integer, it can be a double, it can be a string, it could be anything that we talk about in class, right? It's just a matter of what you want it to do. That's all. So I hope that helps. What I want you guys to do now with this better understanding of what is a method is what I want you to do is I want you to go to, and I'll write it here, right? Go to CodingBat, and I want you to pick 4 exercises within warm-up 2. Okay, so I want you to pick 4 exercises within warm-up 2. And what you can do is just submit a Google Doc with the exercise name and your code. So you don't have to submit, you can, if you want, submit screenshots from the website, or just put the exercise name, warm up 2 dash, whatever the name is. You don't have to copy the description or anything. And then you can either copy and paste your code into that Google Doc just so I can take a look at it. All right. Again, if you have any questions, we can talk more about this on Friday, where we'll go over some more examples, do some more things. But that is your basic intro to what is a method. All right, guys. Have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow.